Greetings, hello, and welcome to Equal First, the podcast about balancing self and service in love and life through career, connections, and courage. I'm Rob Farker, your humble host who hopes, that by seeking out the connections and wisdom that I need in order to put folks equal first with myself, I can help you, my listeners, figure out how to step into life more fully. Much as I'm interested in entrepreneurship, it's good to remember that there are few guarantees and that pivoting is almost a core part of the experience. For that reason, as well as many others, I'm keen to chat with my guest for this episode, Naomi Rose, who has gone through a few challenges in her time. She quit her day job to go into running a cafe and bar and helping crowdfund a bakery that won Britain's Best Loaf Awards just 3 months after opening. And if I got this down right, this was during COVID. Yet even these achievements ran into a challenge known as the cost of living crisis, and the cafe, bar and bakery are sadly no more. Nonetheless, Naomi has pivoted yet again, taking her expertise in business and becoming a strategy and marketing expert to help ambitious online entrepreneurs keep their businesses on track, earning and succeeding, whilst giving the entrepreneurs themselves more time and flexibility in their lives. Naomi brands herself as a digital GP, looking after the health of her clients' businesses, much as a local doctor looks after the health of their patients. I am definitely keen to talk with Naomi about all these pivots and how she can help folks like us who are working up the courage to pivot their lives. Naomi, thank you very much for coming on Equal First.
Oh, thank you ever so much for having me. I'm really excited about this podcast.
Glad to hear it. So tell us a little bit about the situation, kind of like where it all started. What were you doing for your day job? And what made you decide to pivot into starting the Café and Bar?
Well, I used to work a lot in the non-profit and charity sectors, I guess. My role evolved over time, as many jobs do. Before I actually quit, I was leading digital teams for large-scale charity organisations. So that's how I got my knowledge in what I do, really what I do today. So I would work, when you work at a digital team, and I had, I think at the time, 11 people directly reporting to me, as well as work with about 6 or 7 agencies. Plus I serviced the 2,000 other people in the organisation as well, because the world of digital in any organisation touches every area of the organisation. So I saw everything. Everything came through me. I was almost like the gatekeeper in the organisations that I worked for, because my job effectively was to make sure that whatever we did in my team or across the business more widely was in line with the mission, vision, goals and values of that organisation. That was my job. So whatever we were doing was always in line. And it was a really interesting role. And I worked with some really great people. But 9 to 5 is it's not my jam. It's just not my thing. I'm a creative at heart. I'm actually a classically trained cellist, and I still play today. And I was getting to a point where I liked my job, but I wasn't loving it. And I was getting bored, because I was just finding that what I was doing was just not lighting me up. And that was where I was beginning to dislike what I did, because I wasn't necessarily finding the satisfaction and reward that I got. So, in my wisdom, decided in, I think it was 2017, or actually it was probably 2016, I decided I was going to run London Marathon, because I could run 5k. That was all I could run. I could run 5k. And I needed to prove to myself that I can do something that was going to give me reward that I always thought that was impossible. Daft as that sounds, the marathon, I watched it every year and I thought one day I'd really love to run it, but it just seems like 26 miles is just too far to go. And I'm like, well, why am I stopping myself from doing this? I can run 5k, surely it will be, it's just a matter of then training. So if I put a plan together, I will get to where I need to get to. It transpires that a marathon is actually quite difficult.
Well, I mean, it's what? If by 5k you mean 5 kilometres, I mean, it's a marathon is at least 8 times that, for crying out loud. So
yeah. So I could run 3 miles at the time, and I needed to get to 26. So I thought, okay, right, surely I need to prove to myself I can do more than what I'm doing now, that I can actually stretch myself, be out of my comfort zone of just turning up to work, doing my job and going home again. Or in the world of digital, you kind of take it home with you because digital never stops. So I found that actually the whole entire marathon journey took over my life for a while. It was really quite challenging, much more than I expected, because I thought it's just a matter of training and it will be fine. But I was also fundraising because I was doing this for charity. So I signed up to a charity, so it held me accountable. It wasn't like I'd just gone in on the ballot. So I had to raise £2,500 for the charity, which was a really great cause. So I was fundraising, I was training. I thought I wouldn't need to change my eating habits. I had to change everything. I had to schedule my life around training and everything to do for the marathon. And then I got injured. So I overtrained. And this was the Christmas before, and the marathon was in the April. And I'd pulled a muscle which is basically underneath your glute. So it's a really difficult muscle to get to, and it stopped me from running, which was really challenging because I needed to train in running. So I had to completely re-strategize my plan. I had to go back to the drawing board and think, well, if I can't run, what can I do to get me to where I need to go to? So I started doing swimming. I started doing circuits. I actually thought about what is it going to help me that I can do that isn't going to injure me any further, that can build up my strength so I can carry on training. So that's what I did. And then eventually I got back to running again. And I did manage to do the marathon. I had the incredible support of my family that literally thought it was a fun day out in London. So they all came. It was one of the best experiences of my life. It was incredibly challenging. It's my one and only marathon. I don't think I'll be doing it again. But actually, it was, by the end of it, and for anyone who's ever run London Marathon or anyone who's ever run a marathon of that scale, it's incredibly empowering because there is not 1 inch of that mile where there isn't someone cheering you on. It's one of the most overwhelming emotional things that you could go through, because not only are you physically and mentally tired, but the emotional impact of that. And then when you catch a glimpse of your family halfway through, that just sends you over the edge. So half of it, you're like, you're happy, you're crying, it's all of the emotions, and you're physically hurting as well because of having endured like 26 miles when I could only run 3 miles. And by the end of that, I'd realised that actually the only person that was putting limits on what I could do was me. I managed to run something that I thought was completely impossible for someone like me. And that was my own limiting belief. So being able to run that marathon made me realise that actually, even though I'm doing this 9 to 5, and I hoped I was doing a good job, my team seemed to be like a really high performing team a lot of the time, and I'd often measure my success based on how well my team were doing. But actually I'm like, I feel like I'm limited. I'm not being able to earn the money I want to earn, because when you work for someone else you have a salary, so you get capped at what you can earn, particularly in the charity sector. And I'm not able to necessarily do everything that I want to do because I'm guided by the business kind of mission, values, goals and everything, which to some extent aligned with my own. But I often didn't always agree with other people's decisions, so I'd find myself doing something that I didn't feel was quite right. So that's when I was like, I'm gonna go and work for myself. So I handed in my notice, and I was going to go and consult, being digital consultant, doing social media, email, that kind of thing. And they said, could you just stay on a little bit longer and just help us out a bit more? And I, okay, but I'm not, you're going to backfill my job. I'm not coming back to this. I am definitely leaving, which to my team, they were like, how can you leave a job not knowing what you're doing? I'm like, I'll figure it out, because we are, as human beings, we are survivors. We're born to survive. So it was the summer of 2018. And every weekend we used to walk our dog along the river, because there's a river in our town, and go and have a coffee in the morning and then walk her back again. And that was kind of our weekend tradition. One morning we were on our way back, and this old derelict building that had been there for years, just to kind of give you an idea visually, it kind of had circus posters up in the window, it had smashed glasses, it was a rundown old nightclub. It wasn't the nicest looking building, but they started renovating it, and it had been sat there like this for about, I think, 12 years, something like that. And we were just nosying in the window, as one does, wondering what they're doing. And the lady who was renovating it said, "Do you want to come and have a look inside?" I'm like, "Sure." I'm always intrigued by people renovating buildings because my husband and I absolutely love property. His mum's a property developer and has built loads of houses, so that's always our sort of thing. And we walked inside to what was this old nightclub. And underneath all of the nightclub driving, and it would also be an amusement arcade, so there's like a glass amusement booth in the corner, was this incredible 90s Art Deco building that had originally been Bedford Hunts and Cam's electricity company showrooms, which was the local showrooms for electricity when it first came into the town in the 90s. And underneath all of the nightclubness was the original parquet flooring, was the original bronze work in the windows, was all of the beautiful ceiling work that had somehow survived being a nightclub for the last 80 odd years or whatever it had been, and it had been a job centre for a while as well. And I'm like, why did we not know that this building existed? We'd lived in this town for a while. We're like, how do we not know this was what the town was? We just thought it was the nightclub and the amusement arcade. I mean, it had bright green bathrooms. I mean, it was quite hideous what was inside. And I went in and I'm like, this would make the most amazing cafe and bar. And we'd always been interested in that side of business and that kind of idea of having your own cafe. Being a musician myself, I always wanted a jazz club. I was a saxophonist as well, even though I'm a cellist now, but I also play saxophone. And I'm like, this would be a great space for having a cafe, a bar, somewhere friendly. It could be dog friendly because there's nowhere dog friendly in my town at that time. And I could bring in live music into the town. That was my aim. And it kind of then snowballed. Literally, it was just a conversation and this kind of vision I had. And I started talking about it with my dad, and he was like, well, why don't we just go for it? What? I work in digital. I've never run my own business. I'm not a professional baker. I've never run a hospitality business. He's like, well, we can either give it a go and see what happens, or we don't, and we'll regret doing it. I'm like, okay. And it went like that, really. And that was, I think, we started renting the building officially in the October. By December, it was open. So that's how quickly I turned it around, because I'm like, I need the Christmas trade, because that is going to be the biggest month of our year. If we miss that, we're going to be starting off on a back foot. So I had, some days, 9 trades on site, because the amount of work, and bearing in mind this building was not a cafe. It was an old nightclub. It didn't have a kitchen. It needed walls moving. I needed building control. And I had no idea what I was doing, absolutely none. A plan. That was the only thing I had, was like, I'm going to put together an action plan, because I'm a project manager. That's what I do. That's how I manage my teams. So the one thing I have is marketing skills, leadership, and project managing. That's the 3 things I can do. I like baking and I love to bake. It was my happy place, hence why I wanted to go down there. But I'm going to need people that can do that bit, because I can't do that every day. So that was my approach, and that's how it kind of snowballed, really.
I have to ask, where did the cash come from for this wonderful venture?
We'd put in, myself and my father actually, we both put in money on our side. So before we even actually gone down the route of signing any documents, I'd actually worked out some of the finances, because starting off a hospitality business is not a cheap venture. So we actually worked out exactly how much we would need to get the doors open. So I researched, I spent hours and hours on Google. I went through all of the different bits. I put in contingency plans. I then worked out roughly the cash flow I would need and what staffing would look like. I had probably about 6 different staffing scenarios based on what I predicted to be customer flow, customer numbers, customer average spend, different kind of options. So I'd kind of based everything on the worst case scenario whatsoever, which was a really great tactic, apart from I didn't accommodate for the best case scenario either. Opening in December, and we opened at the beginning of December, I had private bookings already booked before I'd even opened the doors. That was how popular it was going to be. And this was 2018, so this was pre-COVID. And I don't think we really thought about what would happen if it actually worked really well. I didn't, because I always plan for the worst case scenario. I'm a worst case scenario planner, because I'd rather base my numbers on the bottommost case and we were insanely busy. So it was absolutely incredible, the response we'd had, but we were literally flying by the seat of our pants, for want of a better way, because we didn't I had a team. My team were brilliant, and they were with me throughout. The majority of my core team were with me throughout the entire time I had the business. But one, they weren't tech savvy. I'm obviously a digital person. I wanted to make operations as automated and as smooth as possible, but I had to bear in mind that my staff weren't necessarily tech people. So I had to teach them how to work systems. So I had to bring in systems that they could use easily. That would make life a lot easier. So it's all of these little things that you had to think about, which I didn't even really consider when I was thinking about doing this first of all. So they're all little bits like that. But by, I think, February, I tripled my staff. So February 2019, I tripled my staff. That was how busy it was, which was a great problem to have. But I'd obviously put all my energy into opening up the business, and I was still working full time until mid-November. So I was still doing my day job, and then I see this is, I wouldn't necessarily say this was the best way to do it, but sometimes it's all about messy action, right? By the time we actually opened our doors, I went, oh, now I've actually got to run the business, because my aim was to get the doors open. So I didn't really accommodate for the fact that I would then have the entirety of Christmas. And we were 7 days a week. Our operation was 7 days a week. So we opened the doors. The response was incredible. It was a huge learning curve, massive. What we had to, when you start any business, and particularly one like a hospitality business, you don't really know what's going to happen until you open those doors on day one. You don't know how it's going to work. You don't know what you're going to serve. You don't really know anything. You're working a lot on guesstimations. So probably it took good 2 months before we actually really worked out the kind of systems that were going to work for us. That was how long it kind of really took us. We used to call Saturdays Savage Saturdays, because people in the weekday were a lot calmer than people on Saturday. And on Saturdays, people are busy. They want to get things done. And obviously everybody then wants to come in on a Saturday. So we actually had a different strategy every Saturday for about the first 6 to 8 weeks of how we were going to run the floor, how we were going to run the kitchen, because we were trying to work out the best way to make sure our customers were satisfied. So it took a little bit of time of refining, reviewing, trying again. And obviously people in the world of hospitality are generally quite vocal, so you tend to find out whether people like it or not quite quickly. And particularly on a day like Saturday, when people are generally hangry, they've got stuff to do, they want to get on with it, they're going to tell you what they think. So in some ways it was quite brutal, in other ways it was so helpful, because it helped refine what we did from there on in. And that's how it kind of started, and it kind of evolved from there, really.
It sounds like one heck of a journey, getting that all thrown together and experiencing, that fantastic success. I'm curious about that review process, because, heck, I'm right at the start of this little endeavour myself. You would be my third or fourth recorded guest, and I know that, of course, I'm going to have to do a bit of work before going live, but what was an item that you particularly needed to go back and review and pull apart and find out, and, make sure that you did better after that initial flush of success?
It was the operations. A lot of it was actually really communications. It came down to that. And that could be both digitally and verbally between kitchen, front of house, and customer. So the customer is obviously the end game. But actually what it takes to reach that customer from the minute they put their order in or the minute they walk through the doors, there is quite an operation that goes behind that. And I didn't actually really maybe comprehend the level of detail that would be needed to go into that, to the point where I thought, like, the menus, I didn't really know what we were doing menu-wise until I think the week before. I had put so little focus on that. I knew we'd be doing our own homemade cakes. It was all about being homemade, because that is what I wanted. I wanted my team, and that was the whole ethos of the business, for it to be really good home cooked food, not necessarily fancy pants or anything like that, but it was about good homemade food, and to give my team that were cooks and bakers the opportunity to be creative and have that freedom to do something they loved, because unless you're loving your job, why would you do it? That's my view. Some people do a job out of necessity. I believe you should do a job because you love it, otherwise you're just not going to enjoy what you're doing. So when it came to planning the menu, I thought, oh, this will be nice. Actually, it wasn't even that straightforward, because it's thinking then about how quickly you can serve your customers when you've got multiple orders on. How are you going to store the food? How long it would store? Do you have the space to store it? Do you have the space to cook it? If you're having to do multiple orders, how many things can you do at any one time? What is wastage going to look like? How quickly can it go from order to kitchen to customer to staff to then serve it to the customer? What does that flow look like? And what is the maximum capacity we can do at any one time? So that is how much level of detail. It's not just a matter of sticking a sandwich on a menu. You have to go down to that level of detail, because one things I did not want is wastage. I did not want to have to throw away ingredients. It's totally against my ethos and my ethics of having wastage. So I wanted to make sure that whatever we had at the end of the day was almost like we don't have to throw stuff away, because we have managed our stock levels correctly. So it's thinking logically about that. So when it came to actually reviewing and refining, a lot of it was looking at the menu and working out what exactly people were ordering, what were people asking for that weren't on the menu. And some of that was around dietary requirements. I was probably less aware of how many people would come in wanting things made without gluten. And they would ask for gluten-free. Legally, you can't say that in the UK if you have gluten on site, because you can't necessarily guarantee it, so you have to say made without gluten. How many people would be wanting vegan? And then there would be people that had other dietary restrictions of varying degrees as well. I hadn't quite anticipated that, so we had to then reincorporate some of that as well. So then that's another process you've got to put in. But actually, it's also then working when people order, how long they're waiting for a coffee, how long they're waiting for the food. Will the food get out before the coffee? There is actually a really quite a heavy process to go through, even though you don't necessarily see that when you sit down. Actually, anyone should go and watch in a cafe or a restaurant or anything like that. Just watch the staff. It's fascinating, because when people get it right, that is what you want. You want that sweet spot of the service, the food, and the whole experience. That was my dream. It was about great customer service. It was about a great experience that made people come back over and over again. For me, it was about loyalty. So that refinement was looking at how we were going to retain our customers in the best way possible, so that they get great food, that they like to eat, that they will want to order again consistently. But it's also that whole process of communication between the kitchen staff, the front of house staff, the customer, and making sure that everybody is on the same page. That was the refinement that we had to work a lot on. You can only do that really by testing and learning. It's kind of getting to the end of the day, talking with the staff, reading the reviews online of whether it's good, whether it's not so good, and how you manage that as well. And that was how we spent a lot of time working out what was right and what was wrong.
One of the things that you talked a little bit about in our pre-interview chat, and that I have the sneaking suspicion is applicable here, you talked about data collection. And to me, it doesn't seem obvious as a layperson, of course, as to how you get good data on and granular data on something that seems as chaotic and organic as a cafe or a restaurant. I mean, unless you've got unless you've got complete sort of wireless tracking of all your staff who must be wearing armbands and all that sort of thing. How do you get specific enough data on, and I think you were talking about customer behavior specifically. How do you collect enough data on not just how your business is performing and how your staff is performing, but how your customers are behaving from the minute they walk into the door of your You hope they don't walk into the door of your cafe. That would definitely be an issue that you would immediately want to be fixing. When they walk through the door of your cafe and into the premises.
So when you look at data, when it comes to particularly thinking about your customers, that you can gather like two lots. And obviously you've got the qualitative, which is the feedback that you can gather from people. It's watching and observing. It's feedback from your staff, because they're the ones that have the eyes and ears everywhere. They see. So you watch a front of house manager, they will be watching the floor. They will be watching what everything is going on. They will know exactly what's going on If they are obviously doing their job correctly, they will know exactly who's doing what, where and how. So they are the conductor, they are the musical director of the whole thing. So that you can get qualitative data from them, which is really important to listen to, because like I say, they feel and they speak to the customers as well. So they will know from their experience as to whether the customers are enjoying it or not. And that was one thing we always asked of, how was everything for you today? It wasn't, if someone asks you that, and this is for all of the listeners out there, if someone ever asks you that in a cafe, bar, restaurant, wherever you might go, hospitality business, and they ask you and you haven't had a great experience, tell them why, because that they can work on. It's the people that walk away and don't actually tell you the reasons why. I had customers that would sometimes say that they didn't enjoy something. It wasn't, you had to learn not to take it personally, because all that does is help you improve it for next time. And it's just their opinion. So what you do with that information is up to you, but you have to understand that. And then obviously on the flip side of that, you've got the quantitative stuff. That's the numbers. So hence why a lot of my till systems were online. One, to make everything a bit more automated and easy. But secondly, so I could understand exactly the buying behaviours, the times, busy periods during the day, how many bookings we were getting, how many cancellations we were getting, because they were all the information I could use to make informed decisions about the next part of my strategy. And then even like waiting times. So just understanding all of those bits would make me think, actually, if I know on this point on a Saturday there is going to be consistent waiting time, what is it that's happening? So like on a Thursday around 11 o'clock, it would be manic because it was market day. So at that point, I either had to have an extra member of staff, or we needed to have a new strategy of how we're going to serve people. So some people, by our regular Thursday crew, as we'd call them, we would know what they're having before they walked in the door. So we will be able to almost pre-prepare what they were going to have. That was how consistent they would be. So again, that's the kind of data you can use to then see where your busy periods are, where your not so busy periods are. Where are you opening that you don't need to be open that's costing your business money? So I started opening the business at 8 in the morning. No one came in. It wasn't worth it. And I was paying my staff an extra hour and a half, basically, because they would have to be in at 7:30 or 7 o'clock. So actually, let's scrap that. I can then open less hours and focus on actually serving customers in the time they're going to be in. So again, that's where the quantitative data is really useful, is having the till systems in place, having the point of sale, having the online booking systems, which one makes the customer journey a lot easier. So that is, when we talk about customer journey, it sounds really jargonistic, but it's really understanding what customers expect from you and how they move through your business at different stages. That is what we call a customer journey. So it's looking at their behaviours throughout their time and interaction with you, from the moment they either see you or hear about you, from that very first interaction to that end point. Hopefully, in my case, they come back in time and time again, which a lot of them did. But it's understanding that. So that's where we can use that kind of mixture of qualitative and quantitative data to then inform what strategies and operations and things are moving forward.
Now, on top of all this, you then added crowdfunding a bakery to your what sounds like an already pretty full slate of activities. So tell me a bit more about that, how you found the time. And it does seem as though crowdfunding was a little bit more, I mean, from my limited experience as a customer of crowdfunding rather than someone who's done a campaign, it seems like something that's a little bit more within your skill set, with your experience in digital and marketing already.
Yes. So in obviously 2020, we all know what happens there. In the UK, hospitality businesses were closed down unless you're offering takeaway. And we weren't set up to do that. It wasn't our offering. We were much more about in-person. People would come in and get the odd coffee here and there, but generally speaking, that wasn't our operation. There were other businesses in the town that would offer that. So when we went into COVID and the pandemic, we couldn't get stock for love nor money anyway, even if we wanted to do takeaway. So did the rest of the world. So they'd brought it all in. And actually, I was like, we have been open 15 months pretty much every day. So let's take this time to re-strategize. In hospitality, you don't often get a break like this. So let's use it as a bit of a gift. The world is going through turbulence, so we're going to have to change what we do going forward, because what we did last year is not going to work going forward. We can see that. We can already tell that's going to happen. So we need to re-strategize. So let's get rid of the stuff that isn't working. Let's focus on the stuff that currently is, and let's build on that. So that's where basically with my team, because I very much work with my team were part of this business. They had to input into the strategy, because without their input, I couldn't really understand the best direction. And they were the ones with the ears on the ground a lot of the time. So that was the key bit. They saw, they heard, they were doing the doing. So I was taking into account their opinions. While the sort of world was going through the COVID, I got back into bread baking, which I loved doing before I actually opened the cafe and bar, but I just didn't have time to bake bread. I was running like almost 2 businesses at that point, and I've got live music going on and all sorts of other things as well. So when we went into COVID, I was like, actually, you know what, I can't bake for customers, so I'm going to bake for my street. And bread baking is something they were doing. A lot of places were doing online bread baking courses, and I'd done a couple, but never really done much. And I was like, I really want to develop a few skills around this, because it's something I love to do. So I kind of baked for my neighbours. So most of my neighbours got fed. Most of my neighbours were also diabetic, so it wasn't necessarily the best tactic. But they were very obliging and ate what I was giving them. And when we went back into opening the cafe, because the bar had a lot more restrictions, so people drinking and alcohol was generally very difficult when it came to COVID, because the government put quite strict rules on people going out in the evening, because they're worried about people drinking and then getting too close to each other. And obviously in the UK we had this 2-metre rule, so we spent half of our lives walking around with 2-metre rulers trying to work out exactly how we space people out, and all of the various other government guidelines. So I was very grateful we'd re-strategised, because sometimes we'd get guidelines from the government and we'd have about less than 48 hours to implement them, let alone work out what they meant, because a lot of it was very grey. So sometimes we had like a rule of 6 at one point, we had only 2 families. So we were gatekeepers for people coming in a lot of the time, which was really challenging. But before we went into COVID, I'm very much a champion of local supporting local. So most of the businesses that supplied me were other local businesses, because I believe that we should all support each other. And I'd found a local bakery. There were not many. This was probably from about 10 miles away. And they were, even before COVID, they were having real big staffing issues. Like, we wouldn't get bread until lunchtime, which was too late for us because we'd already had a morning service. So in my kind of bread baking during COVID, I'm like, why don't we just bake bread for the cafe? That way we keep it all in-house. We don't have that constant worry. It doesn't take that long to make in the grand scheme of things in terms of actual physical staff time. It's a matter of kind of kneading it, letting it rise, and then knocking it back and then putting it in the oven again. It's like the time it takes is more of a waiting game than actual physical, I need someone's hands to do the doing. And we didn't need huge amounts of volume in bread every day. We didn't need lots, but we had a very small oven and we had about enough capacity to manage for the cafe. So that's what we did. We started baking our own bread. And I did it initially, and then I trained up my team that weren't bread bakers at all to do it. And people kept asking, where do you get your bread from? I'm like, we make it. Oh, can you make us a loaf? We had a range oven. I mean, we had a home range oven. That was our kitchen setup. It was simple. We were simple people. We didn't have big equipment. We were all home bakers. None of us were professional. So we had a simple setup because that suited our skills and what we needed for run a normal service in the cafe, because it wasn't a huge kitchen. And this kept happening. So we started doing the odd order here and there for people, and I would try some of the sweet bread, like the enriched doughs, like cinnamon buns and various different bits, partly because it was a pet project of mine. And after a while, I'm like, I've just created my own side hustle. I've got this bakery going on while I'm running the cafe, and the bar was kind of going through this open-close hokey-cokey, and we were trying out evening service as well, which didn't really take off, because when you looked at customer behaviour from before COVID to during COVID, it changed hugely. It was a completely different buying experience. I honestly, and like I say, I used quantitative data to work out how people were spending money and where they spent it. What you saw before COVID and what you saw during and post-COVID were 2 different things. And what you could see during that time was unpredictability. There was no consistency whatsoever. Before COVID, people were very cyclical. There was a very clear pattern. During COVID, there wasn't. There really wasn't. Some of my busiest days were Tuesdays for no apparent reason instead of the weekend. And it was just, I don't know how to even staff this, let alone manage the stock levels or anything else. And that was what had changed. You couldn't necessarily use predictability. The one thing I did know was people weren't willing to give up a coffee, but they're willing to give up a cocktail. So the bar wasn't, which was always the cash cow in the business because it was a money maker, wasn't able to, one, open for a lot of the time, and secondly, it wasn't actually even delivering what it could do because I couldn't have live events in there. I couldn't do half the stuff I did to actually make it financially viable. So while I'm kind of thinking in the back of my mind about my bread baking and my side hustle I'm creating, I'm like, this town doesn't really have an artisan bakery. So there's bread baker on the market, but there is a gap here. I can see there is a gap. I'm getting people asking for this. What can I do to make this happen? Because I'm going to crunch some numbers and see whether actually adding a bakery is a great idea or not. So when I started to look at the numbers, I'm like, well, actually, this could be something we could offer as a benefit to people. We know that people are much more into supporting local from COVID. They were definitely looking after the independents a lot more than they would do. That would obviously change over time as we come out of that. So I actually initially went to the bank for a loan because they were giving out COVID loans basically to help people get back on their feet again. Unfortunately, in their view, you had to be profitable for you to get a loan, which was ironic. I'm like, I'm breaking even. I'm in hospitality and I'm breaking even. Surely that's enough, but apparently not. So they were giving out to people that were already doing okay. All right, well, clearly that's never going to be a case. And then someone said to me, why don't you crowdfund? I'm like, why don't I crowdfund? Why did I was like, why did I not think of that? This is the things that I do. There are a lot of stats around crowdfunding that are a bit like when you look at hospitality businesses or any small business. There's a lot of stats that say 85% fail or whatever the latest craze is. It was when I was doing the crowdfunding, it was 75% of crowdfunding campaigns fail. And this is the reason. It's because people do just assume that you can put a crowdfunding page and go for it and that will get you what you want to get to. You have to put a proper campaign behind it. It has to be properly planned. It has to have a strategy behind it for it to work. And actually, as I sat and thought about this, I'm like, this is the ultimate marketing campaign because one, if I don't raise the money, it doesn't happen. I don't get the money. So you have to hit your target for you to actually raise the money and get what you want to at the end of it. So I can find out whether it is something the community want or not. So it's a great bit of market research. Secondly, if people do want it, I've got already a customer base of people off the back of that crowdfunding campaign that are already brought into the bakery that are going to come through my doors. Great. Yeah. That is yes, okay, they are investing. So how crowdfunding works is you donate money to a crowdfunding campaign, but it's not a donation, it's an investment. So usually you get a reward in return. So in my case, it would be like 4-week bread subscription, a coffee subscription, an afternoon tea. So you're kind of almost paying forward. So that's how it works. You get the business or whatever it is you need, but people are paying forward in order to get something out of it in return. So they've got something in the bag, for want of a better word. So I thought, brilliant, I've got customers coming in the door. Yes, they have invested, but generally speaking, most people don't come in and just collect something. They usually then buy something else as well. So great. And then secondly, I get a huge amount of visibility on my business. If I put the right strategy in place to get it there, I've got a PR story, I've got a community interest story. I can get a lot of people behind this and increase my customer base by doing it, as well as them bringing in a better economy into the town as well. So I'm keeping another small business going effectively. So that was how I thought about it. So it took a lot of planning. And when I say planning, I was really thinking about it a year before it actually happened, before I actually got around to it. And you have a very small window with crowdfunding. It's usually no more than 40 days. I did mine in 30 because I thought if I don't do it in 30, it's not going to work. So I had to have a very, very strict strategic plan of what I was going to do and how I was going to basically grow it from there. So that's effectively what I did. I put a plan in place. I had PR, I had marketing, I had the mayor of the local town. He was completely on board and a very visible voice in the community. I got my customers, I got my staff. So there was a huge strategy that went behind it to get it there. And that was actually, it was quite overwhelming because in the end, my target was £15,000. so I could buy the equipment. So we were going to put in some money, but I didn't have the full amount that I needed to open the bakery. And we had a building out the back of my Café and Bar already, so we had a space for it. So what we'd asked for was basically people to match fund the £15,000 that we had to be able to do it. They actually raised 17, and that was over 300 people. And it was that moment that was so overwhelming that I realised that actually, even though this was my kind of cafe bar and then going to be bakery, it was actually a really important part of the community. It was quite humbling to think that actually I started something that the community sees as quite a central place to them, that they're invested in and that they really believe in a time that was very, very turbulent, and people were very cautious about how they were spending their money as well. So that was just really quite an overwhelming thing. So effectively that's how the bakery kind of came about, because it was a great marketing campaign, and so that's where we went.
And then, of course, came the dreaded cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the ending of those initiatives and your next pivot?
Yeah, absolutely. So the bakery, we opened the bakery in January 22, and I'd entered, unbeknown to my team, because they wouldn't have appreciated what I did, but I actually entered them into Britain's Best Loaf Awards about 6 weeks after opening. Not so much thinking we were going to go there to win, but more so that we can network with other bakeries that are the best in the country, and also just see how well we're doing compared to them, because we had no comparison where we were. So I entered and didn't tell them. So I fessed up about 4 weeks later, I think, when we were about a month and a half out of the actual competition itself. So we'd gone, and I said, look, it's a nice day out, it's a food expo as well, we get to meet other bakers, this is a really great experience for us, let's just go and have some fun, have a road trip. It was only about an hour and a half from where we are now, so that's what we did. And we entered into 5 different categories, one being sourdough, one being white loaves, one being granary, and I can't remember what the other 2 were now. The sourdough bread, which had been our biggest challenge, we really, really struggled with that. That was something that took 3 months to nail, practice every day. We just couldn't get that. It was really disheartening. Literally, it'd always come out like pancakes. I was not a sourdough baker. My team weren't sourdough bakers. It was a massive learning curve. But when we eventually nailed it at Christmas in 21, and then we could open the bakery once we nailed it. That came third, which we were absolutely blown away by the fact that when we got judges don't tend to give feedback, but we did actually ask for some. They were like, literally, you just put a bit too much flour on the top. That was it. That was what we got wrong. So for us, and sourdough was one of the most saturated categories in the whole thing. But we'd also, a lot of my customers just loved the normal yeasted bread. So we always did that, because they didn't necessarily want fancy sourdough, which is quite trendy. They just wanted, really great white farmhouse loaf. And that was the bread that won the Britain's Best Loaf Awards, which we were completely shocked about. My head baker turned around to see, "You got to be joking. Got to be joking." I'm like, "No, we've just won." And we loved our bread, but again, you just don't know when you compare. And this is a proper judging, proper white cloaks and everything. I mean, it's quite terrifying, really, watching people judge. We actually had to walk away at one point. So we'd won that, and that was in April 2023. April 22. And then, pretty much as we were winning that, there was all of the PR and media messaging coming out about this cost of living crisis. So that was starting to come into sort of the kind of people's mindsets. And I'd actually been interviewed by the local news about the cost of living crisis, so I'd been on the news talking about it and various different things. And there was there was kind of that moment of being on such a high after winning those awards to being on one of the worst lows, where we'd also then had the war in Ukraine and Russia, which basically knocked our supply chain for 6. So the flour that we were getting would take 3 days on a delivery. It was then taking 14, and that was overnight. So we were running out of flour every day. Every day I was having to run around supermarkets about 10 o'clock at night to find 20 to 30 kilos of flour. That was, and it was all of these little things that started to keep happening. And the stock costs, kind of, you didn't know whether you're going to get stock, let alone the costs were going up by about a third. Then you got the electricity bills that were stacking on top of that. So some bakeries had gone to paying 3 to 4 figures a month to paying 5 figures a month. And they're baking bread. You cannot justify passing on that cost to a customer that will keep that business sustainable. So the only flexibility you have is in a very small profit margin, because people think there's a massive markup on bread. Yes, to some extent there is, but what you're not accommodating for is the cost in building, the cost in staff, the cost in overheads. That takes all of that effort to get that one loaf out the door. That's the reality, let alone like with sourdough. Usually, like if we're thinking about what we were doing on a weekend for our actual orders, we would be thinking about that on a Tuesday, and the sourdough starters would be started on the Wednesday. That would be how far ahead we would work in sourdough, because it would take up to 72 hours to actually make from start to finish. So then kind of in this cost of living crisis, and a lot through the COVID, staffing behaviour had changed. And like I said, I was really lucky with my core team. I had got a really great core team, but some of the other staff, they would come in with certain requirements that they would want, which I couldn't accommodate, because as a hospitality business, generally you've only got so much leeway. You have a job to do, and that's usually like the parameters of it. So finding staff was really, really difficult. People weren't wanting to do hospitality jobs anymore. And this was not only true in my small town, but also in the cities, particularly when it came to bread bakers, because people had decided they didn't want to necessarily work through the night, and they wanted to have a much more sociable job. So they wanted to change the way they're working. So then what happened was a lot of the cities had lost a lot of their staff. So they were offering staff that were less experienced outside of the cities the equivalent salaries to entice them into the roles in the cities. So I eventually lost a lot of my team because I couldn't compete financially with the costs that they were willing to pay. So I'd train up people and they would leave for a job that was paying considerably more in a city that required someone of 3 to 4 years experience instead of 6 months, which is what they often had. And I'd be like, well, I was very open. I had open conversations with my team. I'd be like, you'll be mad not to take that opportunity, because from you personally, why would you? I can't compete with that salary. But if that's what you want to do, I'm not going to stop you from doing that. That's got to be your choice. This is what I am. This is what I offer. I can't give you any more than that. And I wasn't willing to make that change because it makes my business financially viable. These little things started to sort of stack. And to the point where I ended up just working far too many hours that I couldn't cope with. But actually, the bottom line was, financially, the business was coming unfinancially viable because I didn't have the bar. The bar couldn't actually really operate at a financial in the profit that it used to. The cafe kind of ticked along, but again, it wasn't a big money earner in that sense of kind of, we were paying high costs because we were outside of Cambridge in the UK. Is a very expensive city. And even though we were a small town outside of that, we were paying the same rates as they were. So we had to compete with like big city rates as well. So my kind of break-even point was incredibly high each month. And then, of course, I then had the problem with staffing stacked on top of that. So when I started to look at what my next strategy was, which is obviously what I've done, is kind of pivoted and had to change and move throughout that whole entire journey, the options were to look at maybe going and selling online to a wider audience because we didn't have tourism in the town. But it was the wrong location to do that operation from. It wasn't necessarily worth paying the rates that we paid for that particular building in order to be able to deliver something like that. Plus I would need more cash investment at that point, and that was the decision I had to make, was, do I just call what it is now and say we've got to close, or do I try and find another solution? Because actually when I look at what's coming down the track and try and forward plan, I can't see this cost of living crisis going anywhere soon. It's going to be with us for a while. So I need to then float this business for quite a few months, if not years, in order to keep it going. So I had to make that very tough decision to close the doors, which was absolutely the last one, because I was responsible for people's salaries. I was responsible for my team. They invested a lot of time and energy into it. And I didn't, and also it was a place for the community, and it was the right decision to make, but it was a very, very difficult one to do. I made that decision, and unfortunately since then two or three other hospitality businesses have also closed in the town since then. So it's a sign of that, just that time. But in that kind of whole process of closing down and then thinking about what I'm going to do next, because one, I didn't want to work for anyone else, but also I'd just been through like running my own business and this huge amount of knowledge I gained. I didn't want to just kind of leave it locked in my head. I wanted to be able to kind of take it on and give it to other people. Because whether I closed the business or not, it was successful. It's just that the world changed. Unfortunately, the business wasn't set up in a way that could adapt to that. So I had to make the right choice as a leader and a CEO. So what I wanted to do was take everything I'd learned and be able to give that information to other people so they could build businesses that they were passionate about and had that support. Because I did a lot of that on my own. I didn't find the right mentor for me. I did not find someone who specialised in small hospitality businesses like mine that could guide me in the right way. A lot of the mentors were either big retail brands or they dealt with big restaurants. They weren't necessarily going to deal with a small, medium person. So I spent most of my time on Google and I made loads of mistakes doing it. I wasted a lot of time. I didn't even understand VAT, which obviously is something everyone should understand. Numbers is not my game. It was something I didn't understand until I realised that I needed to pay it. And then I understood it very quickly. But again, if you don't know, you don't know. And so I didn't want anyone to ever have that kind of feeling like they don't know and can't find help, which is why I then kind of moved into what I'm doing now, so I could give people the information that I've learned to help them build stronger businesses.
One quick note for those who might be listening from overseas. What is VAT?
It's called value added tax. So basically, and in hospitality, it's actually really, really complicated in the UK, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But basically, you pay 20% on a lot of the goods you buy, apart from in the case of food where it's zero. But in some scenarios of food, you do pay 20%, which is where it gets complicated. So basically, if, say, a customer brought from you a product, sometimes you'll see it in the UK, particularly for businesses. If you're VAT registered, so over a certain amount of money, I was turning over multi-six figures within my first year of business. So over £85,000 you have to register as a VAT business. So if you're under that, you don't necessarily have to. So you can basically get the money back from the government, but you also have to pay it on goods purchased as well. So if that makes sense. So it's kind of a 20% tax usually rule, but that varies in hospitality. So ultimately every quarter you pay the government money. In my case, it was several £1,000s I would have to pay the government every quarter.
We have something similar in Australia, the GST, the Goods and Services Tax, which is 10%. And I think there is some similar confusion at times because, and again, as you mentioned on foodstuffs, because I think it's, with VAT, it's the adding of the value by taking something and processing it and then on selling it. So, an apple in and of itself, because it's just an apple and nothing's been done to it, wouldn't attract GST. But an apple pie, therefore, because the apple has been processed, other ingredients have been added, that would be the sort of thing that I believe would attract that GST. So, yes, I can certainly see how it could be a kind of a mess. So, as you said, you didn't want to let all of this knowledge that you had go. Tell us how you became the digital GP.
Well, I suppose I've been through a couple of pivots. So I closed the Café, Bar and Bakery at the beginning of 2023, so beginning of January last year. And pretty much on the day I officially signed the paperwork, because I closed in the January, but I signed the paperwork to say it was no longer my business in that sense in February. The day after that, I decided to relaunch myself as a hospitality business coach. So that was what I was going to do. So I was going to teach people how to bake online because I'd learnt a lot about baking because like I said, I wasn't professional. And I didn't want, again, people wanted to be able to make the stuff I'd done with them. And it was something that I'd always aspired to do as part of the bakery, was have the baking school. So I'll take it online. I'll bring back the flexibility into my life rather than be wedded to a particular location. And I'll also be a hospitality business coach offering, like I said, the services that I couldn't give to other people. So I started off the business with that in mind, really clear on who my audience was, who they were, what they needed help with. And I started to grow the business in that way. I launched a podcast called Baking Boss Kitchen Secrets, where I talked about the reality of what it's like to run a food business, because I found that not many people were willing to talk about the behind the scenes and the reality, whereas I didn't want that to be a big myth. And when I actually closed the business, I was very vocal and open about the reasons why. And I went to the press and I told them exactly what was going on, because I wanted not only customers that had been very loyal to me to understand the reality of my situation, but I also wanted to let other business owners know they weren't alone, because it is a lonely place, because you're constantly serving with a smile. So why would you ever talk about your problems? Because you can't do that. You don't feel like you can do that to customers. And I was always very open with my customers. They're not stupid. They saw the reality of what we were going through, and they were very sympathetic and understanding. So we often had conversations around what the reality was. And that's why I started the podcast, and that's why I kind of went in that direction. And I'd launched then a recipe book at the end of last year, which showcasing some of the recipes from the entire business, like some of the ones I developed around the Britain's Best Loaf and all of the scones, because we used to do a lot of homemade stuff. And I wanted to be able to share what we'd, again, part of that whole journey. But as kind of the year went on, and I was getting to know other business networks. I'd been online before I went into the cafe, and obviously being digital, but I'd worked in very much non-profit and corporate worlds. Now I was an online business owner, so it's a very different offering from an in-person brick and mortar business to what I was doing before that, to then becoming an online business owner. So I went and found mentors and started building a different network of people. And as I was getting to know different business owners and talking to them, I realised that actually I can offer much more beyond hospitality. And this is where I kind of, around about March this year, I'd been kind of really focused on hospitality. But the problem with the hospitality industry, and it from my own selfish perspective at the moment, is no one's got any money. So as much as I would love to do everything for free all the time, I still needed to earn a living. And at this particular point in time, it wasn't something that's going to be financially viable for my current business. And it wasn't something I necessarily wanted to focus on anymore, because I'd kind of already done that journey. That said, it's not that I can't help. And I do actually still speak to a lot of people with hospitality businesses, funnily enough, because they resonate with my story a lot of the time and where I've been. And a lot of people are like me, that are wanting to start businesses without their experience, but they have a passion for something, but their skill set isn't necessarily thinking about how I set up a business. So often I do talk to a lot of people about that. But I realised that through the conversations I was having with other business owners that weren't necessarily in the hospitality industry, I had a lot that I could offer them. And in some ways, having the cafe, bar and bakery, I'd pigeonholed myself and limited myself to a very specific niche, when actually I'd spent 20 years before that building strategies, launching massive campaigns, working for corporates, understanding audiences, ideal customer, and working on business strategy and branding. So all of that expertise I'd kind of pushed down, because I thought the only expertise I had was really understanding hospitality businesses. So the more I started talking to people and realising, I can really help you here, but you're not a hospitality business, so unfortunately you're not in my niche and I can't do it. And I got to, I think it was March this year, and I was chatting with one of my mentors, and I just said, it's not feeling right. I've thrown a year into sort of really building the audiences and really kind of focusing on it. Something's just not quite sitting with me. She's like, just unleash yourself, just become much more generalist. And that's where we then started having discussions of, right, well, what do you want to specialise in? I said, I don't. Point blank. And this is probably the absolute wrong advice that you would hear from a lot of people when they come into business, saying you need a niche, you need to focus, you need to specialise. I'm like, but I don't. My specialism is looking at the big picture of business and working out who the clients are, what the business owner wants, and putting the right marketing and business strategy together to get them there. Because without marketing, they don't have clients. Without a strategy, they can't put the right marketing in place. That is how I work. And they're like, well, you're specialist in being generalist. I'm like, a bit like a GP then. Because you go to your doctor when there is something generally wrong with you. But you would go to a kidney specialist if you've got something wrong with your kidney, or a ear doctor if you've got an ear infection. But actually, when you've got something wrong where you're like, I don't know what's going on here, I am just not well, that's where you go to a GP. I'm like, that's exactly what I am. That's what I do for business. I problem solve. I can see the big picture because of the experience I've had through corporate and the working in the cafe, where I had to spend most of my time looking at the bigger picture of how everything comes together. So that's what I can offer to people. There are plenty of social media strategists out there. There are plenty of people that can do email. There are plenty of people that can specialise in marketing as a whole. But there are not many people that necessarily think of the top level stuff. And because I've done all of those roles, I understand how they all fit together. And actually, I start from a much higher up perspective. And that's how it all kind of developed.
No, it's been one heck of a journey, that's for sure. And one thing that I really want to ask you about, having gone through so many career changes and what seems like the timeline seems to have been about basically 6 years from 2018 onward, if I've got that right.
Yeah.
I think the COVID crisis did force a lot of people to pivot, but in some ways, I mean, I've been kind of lucky in that the biggest pivot I really had to make over the last few years was transitioning to working from home in 2022. And that actually wasn't directly related to COVID. That was just my company's office circumstances. And there wasn't really much of a change in the way in what I was doing and necessarily how I was doing it, just the premises I was doing it from. I think a lot of people, you hear about pivoting, but they don't really understand the emotion of it, or the thought of pivoting in and of itself feels like an alien thing or something that immediately kicks off a sense of fear. So I suddenly remembered something that I made a note of. You even made a pivot when you were doing that training for the London Marathon, when you found that due to overtraining and that injury, you couldn't train, or at least you couldn't train the way that you had been. That realization accompanied with a legitimate physical discomfort as well. So how did you, what was the emotional experience of realizing not just that you had to pivot, but also while you were going through the process, and how did you get through it?
Yes. Emotions, I think I certainly have been something that I found really actually quite challenging at times, because I am a musician, I'm a creative at heart. So often your emotions are part of what makes you who you are. The one thing that I've always kind of had in the back of my mind, and your mind is your strongest muscle in your body. So I kind of you have to kind of almost sometimes think of your head over your heart a lot of the time to try and manage that. One of the things that I always think about is when I looked at the very first business I started, opening that cafe, and I mean, I was absolutely terrified. I was nowhere near as confident as I am now starting out. Honestly, I wouldn't even talk to customers on the first day. That was how terrified I was, because I was really worried about what everyone would think of me. That was my own mindset. I didn't even really know about mindset until about a year ago when I started working in the online world, because it was never something I came across in the world of hospitality. So I think with every pivot that I've had, there have been really, really strong emotions that I've had to fight. But my Café and Bar was named after my grandmother, Elsie May, because she always wanted her own tea room. And the one ethos she always had through life, because she lived until she was 95. She looked after the elderly until she was 87. And the only reason she stopped was because she lost her sight. I mean, she was older than most of them. I mean, it was hilarious, but she just loved doing it. It was something she loved. She loved hosting. She loved caring. But she lost her sight. So it meant she had to stop doing that. But she loved baking. But she never stopped baking. Just because she lost her sight, she never stopped. She just got scales called Jeeves that talked to her. And I think they were named after Jeeves and Worcester, which is a very old programme here in the UK that I watched growing up as a kid. But that was who she was. It wasn't necessarily because that was kind of the story that I was often PR'd in terms of this was my business. That was the PR story as to why I've named my business after my grandmother. The reality was it was her ethos. It was her way of finding a solution rather than seeing the problem. That was how she looked. So whenever I've made a pivot and I made a change, I always come back to, well, it's my choice. It's my business. I've made it my choice to do it. If it doesn't feel right, what is the solution? What are my options? I look at that. I kind of go back to pen and paper. And it's the one thing that there were many times when I was opening the cafe where I could have ditched it. But there was a big part of me that didn't want to lose face for starting something and then not finishing it, because once I start something, I want to finish it. But the other thing was I had a plan. I had a goal. I knew where I wanted to get to, and I'd work the steps back. But in the grand scheme of many plans, just like when you go on a car journey and you put your final destination in your sat-nav, it doesn't go to plan ever. There are roadworks, there are delays, there's an accident, whatever. But you still get there eventually. You're always going to get there, because if you've got a goal in mind, you will get there. So when you are thinking about making a pivot, and this is why how I manage the emotions is I have a plan, because I can always go back to, but I got a plan. It might change, but I got a plan. I know where I want to get to. I've just got to work the steps through to get it. And I have to just keep my eyes focused on that plan. Sometimes you just have to let the emotions out. Sometimes they just have to come out in whatever way it is. Sometimes it's finding someone that you can talk to, that can help guide you, that can give you that confidence, which I didn't have a lot of the time in the first business. Now I do. Now I wouldn't be without a mentor. But it's being able to understand what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, and listening to those emotions and then using them. But just if you've got a plan, that is the best way you're going to do it, because otherwise your emotions may derail you along that journey and may stop you from doing it. But that's just your fear. So there's a great quote that I often then go back to in my mind is, you only achieve greatness by being outside your comfort zone. So if you feel slightly uncomfortable, you're probably on the right path. You've just got to get comfortable with being that slightly uncomfortable.
Yeah. One of the big ironies, one of the big paradoxes of life.
Yeah, but the one thing we do know in life that we can absolutely guarantee is change is inevitable. So we make pivoting sound like this big thing. Actually, if you ever, and this happens like at New Year's, for instance, when we're thinking about our New Year's resolutions, I'm not a big fan of the New Year's resolution, because if I want to do something, I'll just go out and do it most of the time. I'll put a plan in place and then I'll do it, just to be clear, because I'm a planner. But you look back over a year, right? So you get to the end of the year and you think about everything you've achieved. You think about where you start that year to where you end that year. You have gone through huge amounts of change. You have grown as a person. You have done loads of stuff. Yet somehow we make such a big thing out of making a difference in our business and in our lives that we get so terrified. But look at how much other stuff has changed during that time that has been out of your control. This is one thing you can control. You just get to choose how you do it. So that's up to you. I make it sound simple, I know. It isn't, because I know how simple it isn't. But that sometimes you just have to kind of break it down into the simplicity of it, of change is inevitable. That's the one thing we can guarantee. So why don't I control it?
Yeah. No, and again, it's another one of those ironies. Sometimes the best way to explain something complex is just to try and simplify it as much as possible. And I mean, I've had kind of a little mantra in my head for a little while of it'll do for now. Yeah. That realization that sometimes I might not be where I want to be. I might not be sure how I'm going to get where I'm going, but sometimes that I need to counter that feeling of, okay, well, if I'm not where I want to be, then where I am must suck, it must be bad. It's like, no, there are a lot of good things where I am at the moment, and it might not be where I ought to be yet, but it will do for now. It's a good place to build from.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I do have to ask you about, because one of the things, this podcast is called Equal First, and I call it Equal First because it's about, the tagline is balancing self and service, but ultimately it's also about that realization that while to a certain extent an individual can do things on their own, they do things so much quicker and more effectively and more happily, for want of a better phrase, when other people are involved. And you've talked about how your dad helped you with getting the Café and Bar set up. You talked about the team that was that you had with you in that business. You've talked about, of course, your mentors whom you have come to having as part of your life recently. Tell us a bit more about those people.
Yeah, I think One of the biggest things that I've learned, and I am very strong-minded, so if I've got something I want to do, I will make it happen. So I guess I'm a naturally born leader. I have done a lot of leadership training as well to help me kind of get into my role, because I haven't always had the confidence. But you need to find the right people around you. This is what's really, really important when it comes to business. And I've been reminded of this again, like last week, is about finding the people that will help lift you up, not pull you down. And they're not necessarily going to be the people you immediately find in your family and friend circle. I don't talk about my business with a lot of my friends. They don't get it. That for them, I'm mad. That I've literally been told by some of my family I'm crazy for doing what I'm doing. That is their reality. Because for me, they're crazy being employed by someone else. That just doesn't seem... That is absolutely their choice, and that's what makes them feel comfortable. For me, that makes me feel so uncomfortable, and it's such an unhappy place. I don't want to do that. So you have to find people that will support you, that can understand you, that can help you when you get to those moments when you need someone to lift you up. In the case of, a lot of people say never work with family. A lot of my team have always been very close to me. I get to know them. I get to understand what makes them tick and trust them, because ultimately, if we work well together as a team, it's going to be much more effective. It's going to be much more efficient. We're going to be much more profitable, and we're going to enjoy what we're doing, which is, I hate the phrase work. I absolutely hate it, because it's not work. It should be fun. That's what you spend most of your time there. If you're not enjoying it, why are you doing it? So I'm very lucky that my family understand business. My dad has been part of all of my businesses. He's a completely silent partner now, but he's still involved in it. But he's almost plays the antagonist role, because I've asked him to do that. I've asked him to challenge me. He's asked him to question me and my decisions, because I need that person in my business to make sure I'm going in the right direction. Sometimes it annoys me. I won't lie. I get cross with it. But again, it's surrounding yourself with the people that are going to help you get to where you want to go is so important, because their mindset can often affect your mindset. So I think if you're thinking about growing your business, and this is why I do what I do, because I help people grow their businesses, think about the people you need to help you get to where you really want to go. Don't limit yourself by what other people's opinions are, because opinion is the lowest form of knowledge. Only you can tell yourself what you want to do and where you want to go. McDonald's didn't start with a multi-million-pound franchise from the very beginning. They started with a small car, and someone saw an opportunity. That was where they started. Every business starts from this very small entity. But they made a choice of who they were going to surround themselves by and how they were going to get there. So find the people that you want to be surrounded by. Listen to the podcasts that are really good to help you grow. Go into those Facebook groups, those masterminds, whatever that might be. However it is you need support, go and find it, because that will be the best investments you make in your business.
Something I'm definitely working on at the moment. Well, to wrap this up, or at least to get on the way to wrapping it up, I do like to look at the future a little bit. And this might seem like a bit of an old question, but what, Naomi, do you want the closing days of your life to look like?
So it's actually, funny enough, it's something I often do think about sometimes, because when I talk about what I've done and why I've done it, I'm like, because I didn't want to be the person that's sitting there with the blanket over their knees in their 90s going shoulda, coulda, wouldas. That's not what I want to do. That's not how I wanted to live my life. I don't want to look back regretting all of the decisions I didn't make. I want to be the person that makes the decisions, takes the risks, and lives. That's ultimately where I wanted to go. So where I want to be able to, particularly when it comes to the end of my life and thinking about what I want to have achieved, I want to be able to help. Like, my thing is, I love working with businesses. I'm also a musician as well. So arts is a real big part of my life. I want to be able to bring joy and happiness to people, as well as build better economy, better businesses in a smart and efficient way, so that there are so many people that are so unhappy in what they do in their jobs. And you hear this, there's not many people that are employed that necessarily love their jobs. If you take like a straw poll of your kind of close circle of people, most of them do their jobs because it pays the bills. I don't want a world to be like that. Why is it like that? Why have we decided that actually the debt to paying our bills is doing something we don't like doing. Why is that? So that's what I aim to achieve by doing what I do. I want to help people build businesses out of stuff they love doing. And I was very much told, being a classical musician, you can have passion, you can have profit, but you can't have both, because they don't go together. That was what I was taught from a very, very young age, because in the world of classical music, your career starts when you're in your like 8, 9 and 10-year-old phase. So I made the choice of music, so I chose passion over profit. As I've grown older and as I've kind of gone on this entrepreneurial journey, that is nowhere near the case. That is so untrue. You get to choose how much money you make. You really do get to choose that. That's up to you. The only person stopping you is you. So I want to be able to have shown and demonstrated that you can do all of that. And that's what I want to kind of, in my life, be able to have achieved, as well as travel the world. That's my other aim. And I'll still be playing until I can no longer hold a bow in my hands.
Well, after having listened to this chat, where can people go to find out more about Naomi Rose and engage you and your services?
Well, probably best place to start is my website, naomicrose.co. So Naomi, Naomic, which stands for Claire, Rose, like the flower, Rose.co. And it's got my socials on there. So I am on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on, what's the other one, Facebook. So you can go and find me there. I've also got a free business growth guide on there, so you can go and download that, totally free. It's like a checklist. I love a checklist. But basically, if you need a bit of help growing your business at the moment, or if you're in the middle of thinking about pivoting, it's a great place to take a bit of a business health check, for want of a better word, because I'm the digital GP. Have a little bit of a health check with yourself and work out, actually, is my business really working for me at the moment? So go grab that. It's free on my website. Or if you want to have a chat, I offer free business audits for people. So if you are thinking about pivoting and you just don't know who to talk to, don't sit there and wonder. Just book a call with me. You get 30 minutes free with me anyway. So come and book a call and let's get those problems solved. Don't sit and ponder on it. Let's just get some actions in place.
Sounds like a bloody good idea, quite frankly. Well, Naomi, thank you once again for your time. It has been wonderful chatting with you. You have a fantastic story of, finding yourself after 20 years in a career and making some incredible decisions. It definitely does not sound like you are going to wind up in your closing days with the blanket over your legs, bemoaning the decisions that, playing it safe instead of taking some risks and living well. That is absolutely evident.
No, that's my aim anyways.
Yeah.